Welcome to the Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolius, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to episode number 5 of the Unstressed Exec podcast. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolius, executive and resilience coach, forensic psychologist, and someone deeply committed to conversations that matter. And today's conversation really matters because this episode marks the first of a special 4-part series in honor of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. This is a topic that is personal to me, not just as a coach and psychologist, but also as a man, as a son, as a friend, as someone who has worked with hundreds of male executives, fathers, first responders, and trauma survivors, many of whom carry silent burdens and hidden wounds that the world rarely sees. So today we're going to shine a light on something too often left in the dark. I want to open with a quote from something that the psychotherapist Esther Perel recently shared at a retreat. This quote highlights the complexity around masculinity, its place in a patriarchal system, and the importance of women and men supporting each other. So here's the quote. In the conversation about men, we need to highlight that the lives of women will not change until the lives of men change. A lot of our focus is on the power of men, and this notion that masculinity and patriarchy are systems that oppress women. In reality, these oppress everybody, both women and men. In the patriarchy, men can be either powerful or connected, but never both at the same time. In the patriarchy, masculinity is spoken as if it is a given, when in fact it is constantly spoken in the imperative, such as, prove you are a man, show me you're a man, what kind of man are you? In the end, if masculinity was such a given, it wouldn't have to prove itself all the time. If it has to prove itself all the time, it is actually a very fragile identity, very hard to acquire, and very easy to lose. So when it comes to the focus on men, the real conversation should be about the powerlessness that men experience. End quote. That is such a powerful statement by a very insightful and wise female therapist. And what hits me is when she talks about the powerlessness that men experience because of the fragility of this notion of masculinity in a world where we constantly have to prove it. We constantly have to demonstrate it. We're constantly being called onto the carpet to demonstrate our masculinity, our maleness. That's very powerful. So we're going to unpack that today and talk about it. So to start with, I want to talk about the silent struggle and understanding what men face in this larger context of the patriarchy and in these outdated societal norms about what masculinity is. So let's start with a difficult truth, and that is that men are not okay. And let's look at the data. In the United States, men die by suicide at nearly 4 times the rate of women. 4 times. Men make up over 75% of suicide deaths annually. Men are far less likely to seek mental health support, and yet far more likely to suffer in silence. They are socially disconnected. Young boys fall behind girls in school. Rates of substance abuse, violent crime involvement, homelessness, and incarceration are all significantly higher for men than for women. And by the way, I'm not juxtaposing men versus women to point fingers at women. There's no pointing here. It's just highlighting the facts to place an understanding of the landscape that men operate in and the red flags related to that. And these things that I just shared, they're not just statistics. They are stories. They are brothers, fathers, sons, husbands, leaders, employees, many of whom don't feel that they have permission to say, hey, I'm not doing all right. I'm not okay. That is a really hard thing for a man to say, and it's really awkward to hear in our society. And signal that men get is, I just need to shut the hell up. So what we've seen specifically with New York University marketing professor Scott Galloway, he has pointed out quite poignantly and powerfully that we are witnessing what he calls a crisis of disconnection among young men. They're falling behind in education. They're struggling to build intimate relationships, experiencing economic instability, and increasingly withdrawing from society. Here's a quote from Galloway. Quote, "We are creating a generation of broken, lonely men, and nobody wants to talk about it." End quote. And yet, we must talk about it because silence is part of the problem that we're addressing. So, why is there such a stigma for men to admit that they're struggling and reach out for help? Why does the stigma still thrive? Why don't men talk? Why don't we seek help? For generations, men have been taught directly and indirectly that vulnerability equals weakness, that asking for help is shameful, that real men are stoic, tough, self-reliant. We pull ourselves up from our bootstraps. I posted something on my TikTok account, The Unstressed Exec, a few days ago, asking men, how do they help women understand their struggles? How do they help women understand how men need to be heard and understood? And the first post I got, or the first comment I got, was from a gentleman who literally said, "Why would I do that? Why would I ask a woman to understand my struggles? That's my job." He meant it genuinely. But I think that is part of the problem. Even asking the question, how can we as men help women understand us, is reacted to by men as, why would I do that? What's wrong with you? Buck up, toughen up. So it was a really interesting interaction. We're told to be tough and stoic. And while resilience is a strength and can be a strength, it could even be a superpower, emotional repression is not. But what do we hear so often? Boys don't cry. Man up. Don't be soft. Stop being like a girl, right? And these phrases seem harmless. In many contexts, they seem like men just talking shit, right? But they imprint something lasting, especially at a young age. They teach boys to disconnect from their emotional world. And when boys become men, they often lack the vocabulary, they lack the permission, and the pathways to seek support, even when they desperately need it. One client I worked with, a CEO in his 50s, recently told me, "I've built 3 companies, I've led 1,000-person teams, but I have no idea how to tell my wife that I'm scared or how to say I feel lonely." Think about that for a minute. This guy is kind of a titan in the business world, and yet he doesn't know how to tell his wife that he feels scared or lonely. And he's not alone, not by a long shot. So the question then is, how do we start to break this stigma? What do we do about it? How do we change this? Well, it starts by normalizing the struggle. And it also starts by increasing awareness across men that you're not alone, that other men are struggling. We need more men in the media, in leadership, in everyday life to speak openly about their mental health journeys, to model what it looks like to ask for help without shame. I like to say it this way, to model strength in vulnerability. And by doing that, we are redefining what strength means. Strength isn't pretending everything is fine. It's having the courage to face what isn't. Here are 3 things we can all do to help normalize mental health of men. Number 1, share stories. Whether it's your own or someone else's, stories break silence. They bring us together. They help us understand and identify what someone else might be going through that resonates back with our life. That's the beauty of music. That's the beauty of movies, because we can see ourselves in some of the characters that we're watching. We can express and feel their pain and share in some shared human experience through that, right? The second is challenge harmful norms. When you hear toxic language around manhood, call it out. Don't cry. Boys don't cry. Toughen up. Call it out. Now, I'm not saying that you tell some other parent how to parent their children. That gets into really nuanced, often conflictual territory. But there are times in our own lives or with each other that we can do that. I have actually called out other fathers that are friends of mine. I haven't called them out in public, but when I've had a time alone, I've let them know that there's a downside to maybe how they're speaking to their son. And then I let them handle that how they want. They can blow me off, or they can use that insight and hopefully turn it into wisdom to help shape their behavior for the better. Number 3, make help visible. So we need to talk openly about therapy, about coaching, mediation, meditation, stress, grief, in everyday conversations. When we bring these things into the open, we begin to untangle the stigma that keeps so many men stuck. A related issue here is a majority of men are in relationship to women. They are our wives, they are our girlfriends, our fiancés, our sisters, our mothers, our aunts, right? So how can women help here with compassion and not control? So let's talk about the role of women, because women are often the emotional anchors in our lives. They're partners, mothers, sisters, friends, colleagues. And you, I'm speaking to the women now, you are often the first to sense when something's wrong in us. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist. I'm an executive coach, but I will be the first to say that women, on average, are much more finely attuned to the emotional reactivity and the emotional lives of other people than men are. I think part of that is socialization. I actually think some of it might even be kind of genetic predisposition. And there's some research that backs that up. But the reality is they are often the first to sense that something's off. So how can you as women help without pressuring, controlling, or unintentionally shaming? Because the first surefire way to get a man to shut up and go silent is to pressure him to talk, to feel like you are controlling his emotional expression, or shaming him for having feelings. So here are 5 practical ways that women can support men in their lives. Number 1, listen without fixing. And by the way, this is a great strategy for men too. Men often want to go into fix-it mode when sometimes women just need to be heard and supported. Let him feel heard before offering solutions. Most men are already working on 1,000 solutions in their head. What you see and hear from them, what they express, is about 10% of the war of thoughts and options and, opinions that are circling and running around their head all the time. Trust me, they are working at about 15 different versions of the solution. You don't have to offer that. So again, listen without fixing. Number 2, ask open-ended, low-pressure questions. So for example, try saying this: how are you holding up lately? Or what's been weighing on you? I really want to understand. Then wait. Allow silence to occur, because silence creates space. It also creates opportunity for him to settle in and feel open to sharing. If you ask these questions and you immediately keep talking, the message, whether you meant it or not, is I really don't want to hear you, so shut the hell up. Number 3, affirm vulnerability. Affirm vulnerability. If he shares something, however small, thank him. Hey, thanks for sharing. I know that might have been hard. Reinforce that opening up is safe. It's not weak. Or you could say, I am so glad you shared that. Thank you. I know that might have been difficult, but I really think it's strong for you to own those feelings. Okay. Number 4, be mindful of timing and tone. So what I mean here is choose moments when there's natural connection, whether it's on a walk, in the car, doing something side by side. Sometimes men are more likely to open up without direct eye contact or intense emotional pressure, because if you do give them too much of that, too much pressure, too much staring at them, they feel like they're in an interrogation. They feel like they're at the police precinct, right? In the interview room with the detective. That's the last thing we want to feel. My quick backstory. So my mother was Irish. My father was Greek. They're both, moved on to whatever comes after this mortal coil. They had a very loving, long-term relationship. But my father came from a very traditional Greek culture. Many years ago, you didn't marry outside the Greek culture back then. So when he got engaged, that was a major brouhaha in the Greek family. He was also a Marine. He fought in Korea. And he was one of the most loving, heartfelt men that I've ever known, not only because he was my father, but he also had his demons. He had a temper at times. He, he was a very loving man, but he wasn't the most emotionally intelligent, as many men born back at that, in that time frame were not. Certainly no one sat him down as a boy and told him how to manage his emotions or regulate his emotions. And so when my mother, who was very much in tune emotionally, had a very high emotional IQ, when she needed to talk to him about something difficult, she would always take him out to dinner because she knew that he would contain his reactivity in a public setting. And she would really be able to kind of architect a more open and calm discussion about things. And then when they came back home, they could continue the discussion, but they already got over the initial part of the discussion, which is ripe for potential, eruption, if you will. So I'm not saying you use that necessarily, but that kind of gets at this question of timing and tone. The fifth recommendation for women is encourage professional help gently. So if needed, say something like, you don't have to go through this alone. It seems like you're carrying all of these burdens by yourself. I can help you find someone if you're open to it. And then let it be. Don't pressure. Don't harp on this day after day after day. Think of it as a seed. You're planting a seed. You're watering you're fertilizing and watering that environment, and you're giving it a chance to sprout. And it may not sprout for days, weeks, even months until he hits some other breaking point. He loses his temper. He has a really bad moment. And then he comes back around and he says, hey, a few weeks ago, you mentioned helping me find someone. Hey, let's talk about that. So that's the best way to approach that. Think of framing therapy or coaching as a sign of strength, not surrender. And remember, you are not responsible for his healing. This is for the women. You are not responsible for his healing, but your support can be a bridge to that healing. No more than if you plant a seed, you're not responsible for that seed or that flower or that bush or that tree growing. You might be responsible in part for creating the environment that maximizes the chance that it will grow. I think that's a good way that we can think of each other actually in relationships. I can't control the other person. I can't make them choose growth, but I can be the environment or the soil that maximizes the chance that they will be open to it and that they will grow and thrive. All right. So let's talk about kind of taking collective action, whether this is getting a little more systemic, right? And what we can do here, whether it's in our homes, our workplaces, or just in larger systemically in the culture that we live in, right? And I think it's important that we think bigger and we think systemically about this problem. Men's mental health isn't just a private issue. It's a workplace issue. It's a leadership issue. It's a cultural issue. And what we've seen time and again is that when men are not emotionally regulating and they're on the bad end of that continuum, bad things happen. Violence erupts. Bad leadership decisions are made. And at the ultimate, there's really bad systemic issues that can be made. Going to war, escalating international conflicts, and so on. So emotional regulation is key for men because so many men, or let me say it this way, so many people in positions of power are men. So here are a few ways that you can make a difference, what I call at scale. First, in the workplace, encourage leaders to model vulnerability. Offer anonymous mental health screenings, provide access to male-focused support groups, and rethink mental health days, not as indulgences, but investments. And when it comes to modeling vulnerability or strength through vulnerability, when a man does that, it's so important that the messaging that we support around that is one of support and strength. The second way to do this systemically is in the community. Host events during Men's Mental Health Month, invite male speakers to share real stories about vulnerability and growth, not just highlight reels. And then collaborate with local gyms, sports clubs, or veterans groups to bring conversations to places that men already gather, right? Men are going to seek community. The problem is in those communities, and as a result of cultural socialization in those communities, year over year over year, in the more traditional places like gyms and sports clubs, veterans groups, at the local bar, you just don't find these conversations often, right? So the ability to implement and introduce openness to these things can really be a game changer over time. And the other systemic way is think of the circles within which you operate, right? Share mental health resources on social media, promote organizations like Movember, right? Or headsupguys.org or the Mankind Project. All of these are projects that really help men support men, and in some ways help women support men just to develop their emotional life and be more aware and be more in tune to what is going on emotionally and psychologically. You can also encourage male friends to check in with one another beyond just surface level talk. Even a single conversation, the right one at the right moment, can save a life. I've literally seen it in my own life. I've seen it in my coaching, and I've seen it in my therapy, and I've literally seen it in my personal life as well. So let me offer some closing reflections now and kind of talk a little bit more about the road ahead. So I think I'm going to highlight this. The strongest man I've ever met are not the ones who hide their pain. They're the ones who face it, name it, and then move through it. So they don't necessarily wear armor, but what they're doing is they're allowing pain to be felt and embraced, and they're using that to fuel their growth and their development. I'm going to end kind of where I began with the statement that men are not okay. I'm not saying that every man is not okay. I'm not saying that every man is going to admit he's not okay. But when you look at the data, men are really not okay, but they don't have to stay that way. So whether you're a man listening who feels like no one understands what you're carrying, or someone who loves a man struggling in silence, know this: there is help, there is hope, there is healing, and you're not alone. And you don't have to do this alone. We have all heard the phrase that hope floats. And I love that, right? Hope rises us up above all else. And I do love that. I'm a fan of it. But I have a little spin on that. Hope floats, but it don't swim. Hope gets us to the top of the water. Let's say a river. It gets us to the top of the river. But if we want to get to the edge of the river where it's safe and we can get out on the land, we've got to take action. We've got to do something in our life. We've got to change our behavior. We've got to support ourselves, our fellow men, or if you're a woman, support the man in your life to help him make that movement. So here's my call to action to you all. If this episode resonated, I want you to take one small action. Send this episode to a man in your life who might need it. Share it on social media with the note of encouragement, or just take a quiet moment to reach out and ask someone genuinely and kind of individually, how are you really doing? And just listen. Be open to what comes back. All right. Thank you for showing up for this conversation, and thank you for showing up for the men who need it most. Throughout the month of June, I'm going to be reflecting on topics related to men's wellness and well-being and mental health. In our next episode, we'll explore barriers to men's mental health and understanding the personal, professional, and societal hurdles to men seeking help and getting the help that they need. Until then, I'm Dr. George Vergolius, the Unstressed Exec. Thanks for listening. See you next time. And remember, shift happens.